Okay, it's not blown out.
Welcome, everyone. You are here in the right place with coffee or tea with your transportation planners. This is your opportunity to ask your questions. I have my little dog mug here today. So I hope that you're joining us, in a relaxed state, but are ready to ask your questions. You can ask your questions live. You can do that by typing it into the comment section. You can either, if you're on YouTube, the comment section is generally on your right-hand side. And if you're on Facebook, it's generally below, but depending on your view, it may also be on your right-hand side. I am joined here today by some of my friends and colleagues with the French Broad River Metropolitan Organization, Emily, John, and Tristan. And AARP hosts events like these because we know that transportation, having effective transportation, is a huge part of aging in place, aging in community. And accessible, affordable transportation affects all of us, but older adults, even at a higher rate. Older adults tend to drive less than their younger counterparts. So having options for transit and walkability, even bikeability are important options for older adults. So there's a lot going on in the planning world right now, and maybe it's a lot that our citizens and community members don't always see what's going on behind the curtain. So, like, what would you say? Let's start with Tristan. What would you say is the biggest hot topic right now in the transportation planning world?
Sure. I think the biggest thing right now is probably funding.
Okay.
It's all in all, in terms of the long-term situation, you have gas tax revenues that are declining. Vehicles are becoming more efficient. There's more electric vehicles out there. So a lot of transportation being reliant upon the gas tax means that revenues are slowly on the decline, or not so slowly. But it's you combine that with increasing costs for projects, be that labor costs or material costs. Right now, it's both, and so you're seeing a lot of kind of slowdown in terms of project delivery. So a lot of what we're talking about right now is, what are we going to do with the projects we have in our region that are slated and scheduled to go? What are the projects that we really want to see happen sooner? What are the projects that we might be a little more okay with pushing back? And then, so in terms of planning for new projects, it's not a great conversation at the moment. There's not much funding in the long-term outlook, and so prioritizing for new projects, we aren't. I wouldn't say we are totally optimistic about the prospects of that for this round of prioritization. Well, we shall see.
Wow.
The good news is the short-term finances for NCDOT are really pretty good.
Okay.
Their balance is over $1 billion. So, as I like to say, for a broke organization, that's pretty good. That's a solid bank account. But the short term shouldn't be confused with the long term. The long term is still pretty grim.
Wow. I mean, that's something that I think I hadn't given much thought to, the increased cost of building and infrastructure and the decreased revenue as it relates to gas tax and people not driving as much, more fuel efficient cars. So that there's this real prioritization going on right now in terms of what projects. And when you say projects, are you pretty much just talking about infrastructure builds like intersections and roads, sidewalks, complete streets? Is that the sort of project that you're talking about?
Right. For the most part, roadway and bike ped projects. They're only a little bit of bike ped, but for the most part, it's intersection, interstates, complete streets projects. we have a fairly large slate of projects that are funded and committed.
Okay.
Uh, so the I-26 connector, that's easily the biggest one. Over $1 billion
Wow.
is planned to be invested for that section. Amboy Meadow, Swananoa River Road, Sweeten Creek Road, Mills Gap Road, Riverside Drive. There's a lot of projects. I just named a bunch of Buncombe projects, but Henderson and Haywood too. There's a lot of projects that are funded and committed, and because of projected funding shortfalls and cost increases, our anticipated time of delivery for those projects is being pushed further and further out.
Okay. Well, that's really good intel. And if you're watching this today, you might have a question about a project near your home or anything that you've heard of, and now would be a good chance to ask about that. Where that is in the prioritization process. So, Emily, last time we were here together, you and others shared a little bit about a survey. Community survey for input process. Where is that at this point?
So I think you're referring to the Regional Transit Feasibility Study survey that we
Yes.
had a couple months ago. And at this point, the consultant is working on putting together the final report for the Regional Transit Feasibility Study. And we will be presenting that to the board in August for either adoption or not.
So when you say adoption, what does that mean as it relates to what Tristan just shared in terms of like prioritization process? How do those two things fit together? The results of the feasibility study and the prioritization of existing projects, or do they fit together?
So essentially, when I say adoption, I just mean that the MPO board, which has already approved the feasibility study that is now almost completed, would vote whether or not to include it as an official long-range plan,
Okay.
which would therefore serve to guide regional transit in the future.
Wow. So what kind of response rate did you get to the feasibility study?
We got about double the response rate that we received in December, which is really great. And it was pretty representative of people across the region, not just in one specific area, which was also really nice.
Great, great. Did you get any age distribution and kind of the response rate for that? Are you aware of, older adults responded? And I know I'm asking you questions you might not have at your fingertips, and that's okay.
I do not have that at my fingertips.
Cool. I know that we were definitely trying to encourage AARP members and other consumers to take part, and it's always interesting to know if that was successful or not. So didn't mean to put you on the spot. And John, what's happening from the desk of John Rideout? You've got a new role, don't you?
So yes, I've been transitioning from doing our transportation demand management into more of a general transportation planner, kind of starting up working with both our local area projects as well as our transportation improvement projects items. I'm still doing a few of the corridor studies, so Hendersonville Road and Tunnel Road. Those are going to be either wrapping up or wrapped up. We're taking it out to our community partners in front of the city's boards and commissions for their review and process, and looking to formalize those as final plans for those two areas. So, yep, I am now back in my nice, wonderful office. At least hanging out here. It's kind of quiet and empty, so it's a good space to do. But yeah, it's been a interesting transition from TDM and our partnership with AARP with our Strive events to this kind of a new role.
Yeah. And where can people learn more about those studies that you mentioned? You mentioned Tunnel Road and was it Hendersonville Road?
Correct.
Hmm.
We're on the French Border River NPO website under corridor studies. So there's a
Okay.
little tab on the upper right that will drop you into our local plans and studies.
Okay, so they're about wrapping up those studies in particular, and so people can expect to see more of what you've learned in that process. And then, I'll think of either Tunnel Road or Hendersonville Road. What kind of feedback did you get in general? Do you have any like kind of off the cuff commentary without it being official?
Oh yes, I think on both areas it was kind of comments that there were very much a strong desire for major safety improvements for multimodal capacity. So actually improving a lot of the crosswalks, access to and from, say, bus stops in the area, as well as just trying to prevent more user conflicts along both of those corridors. And both of them are also looking at them within the context of land use. So making sure that, the properties, the businesses along the area, that they still have easy and available access and folks can get to and from either their residences or businesses with many different modes as safely and as easily as possible.
Well, that sounds like that could be a major improvement for many people. Okay, I think, and I just want to remind folks watching, if you have questions, pop them in. We want to hear from you. I know there are some people watching us today, so we'd love to hear your questions. Tristan, I notice you look like you're ready to share something.
Oh, I was going to say, Rebecca, what have you and AARP been up to? I noticed there's an intersection in my neighborhood that looks a little different.
Oh yeah, I should have brought up a picture of that. So because AARP does support, multiple modes of getting around, and knowing that older adults drive with less frequency than younger people, we worked with Asheville on Bikes and the Blue Ridge Bike Club as part of the Street Tweaks team, and worked to change the intersection at Westwood and Waynesville behind the Walk restaurant in West Asheville. And it is, I think, really cool. The design relied on heavy input from the community on what people felt in that space. So we really wanted to cultivate a sense of place that was reflective of people's thoughts and feelings. And it really pulled quite a bit of inspiration through Christopher's Garden, which is right there at that intersection, as I'm sure you all know. And so I'll see if I can pull up a picture while we're talking here to share with people. But it's pretty cool. There's a neighborhood roundabout there, and my mother-in-law, who lives in the neighborhood, said to me, like, "Why is there a stop sign? Like, this doesn't feel like there should be a stop sign here." And the response that I've learned about this is that it's an unconventional intersection, which requires an unconventional treatment, and it's not a perfect circle, and so it doesn't work like a perfect traffic circle. Rather, it's a neighborhood roundabout. So therefore, the teardrop sort of center and the stop sign there, because it doesn't work in the way as a regular traffic circle. So I think that that's feedback that some people have had, like, why is there a stop sign in this neighborhood roundabout? But in general, it is so much nicer to walk in there and to use that intersection now. You know which way to go. As I observe cars, they seem to know what to do just fine. It doesn't look like it's caused any problems. So we're excited, and I think we're starting to collect community input on what people think about that. We'll have some signs up with QR codes so people can take a survey, because that was a short-term installation. As y'all know, that's referred to as tactical urbanism, or quick build. So it took about a year of planning, but about a long weekend of building and painting, and we'll be up for a year to study the impact of, to then see how and if some of these more expensive infrastructure changes might take place there. And so that actually leads me to thinking an interesting question, Tristan. Like, you mentioned this reduction in revenue that will be available for transportation changes. Like, what can the people do? Like, that was a people-led project where it costs certainly a lot less than it would to do a full build out. Do you see like a balance in that changing? People kind of organizing around things that they can do in their communities to make it more accessible?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think there's, I think there are a whole lot of potential projects out there where it wouldn't require a whole lot of, heavy equipment to make improvements happen. The thing I would say is that I wouldn't say that that's something that can generally take care of all of our transportation issues, or
Right.
a lot of them. I think the issues, facing especially the Wilma-Dykeman corridor, Amboy Meadow, Swananoa River Road, those are going to be big rebuilds. I mean, we saw that go through with the Rad Tip project that recently reopened. I mean, a lot of those projects, you've got to pretty much break down the road and rebuild it. And I think that's where, we're going to see a lot of those really big total area makeovers. I think the problem is that we just we're not going to see them as frequently as we had hoped. It was only a couple of years ago that I think Amboy Meadow, Swannanoa River Road, those were set to begin construction, I think by 2025. And now we're talking about those projects 2028, 2030, maybe later than that. So I do think that trying to find some more easy wins is going to be an important thing moving forward, whether that's a neighborhood-led effort, coordinating with your local governments,
of course,
or looking at wins we can get through resurfacing projects. So the town of Canton got some pretty substantial wins on their main street a few years ago by trying to coordinate improvements that went along with the resurfacing of that road. And so where can we find more of those? Still count on those bigger long-term wins coming just a little bit later.
Well, that's a kind of inspiring and empowering way to think about it. So I want to make actually another announcement about some things AARP is up to in a moment. But before I do that, something that's on my mind is the infrastructure bill, that has come forward that has not passed the Senate yet. But so I know that there's some reworking. So when we talk about some of the revenues decreasing for some of these projects, is there an anticipation that if some type of infrastructure bill is passed, that will speed up, rather than slow down the rate of some of the changes that are anticipated?
It certainly wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of folks are generally looking for an infusion of funding into transportation to alleviate some of these concerns. So I think an infrastructure stimulus package from the federal government. I think there's a lot of things that would help with. I think as it's scoped out, there's also a lot of kind of specific parts to that bill that would be, in my personal opinion, pretty interesting. There's more of an emphasis on infrastructure for electric vehicles than we've seen traditionally. There's more of an emphasis on rail. So I think it could be a really interesting package moving forward. I do understand that it's changed substantially since it was initially released. But I still think that, given kind of the state of transportation funding, I know a lot of people, especially at NCDOT, who would look forward to that kind of infusion of funds. The other thing I'd say to look out for is the federal transportation bill. So there's the FAST Act, that's the 5-year transportation bill that became a 6-year transportation bill because they didn't pass a new one. But there's a new one. It's moving forward through the House, and the Invest in America Act, I believe it's called. And I think that has some pretty substantial changes as well. It does increase federal funding by quite a bit, and it increases it in programs that I think have really benefited our region. So, a lot of the funding that comes through the MPO that goes towards greenways, sidewalks, just a lot of it is going towards bike ped right now. That funding pot would be set to increase. And to me, there's a lot of other neat changes that could be a little more of a long-term change.
That's exciting. That's some optimistic sort of news. I mean, so it sounds like you're saying in the present moment, we you can't plan for something you don't know that you'll have. So there's not planning on any of this based on any of this potential anticipated revenue, but that there are some bills moving forward where that, they're looking for some substantial increases, and some potentially creative and new uses of funds.
Right. And I think, a lot of what we're doing at the MPO is trying to set ourselves up for when an opportunity arises, we have some iron that we can heat up and get going, whether that's regional transit or the Hellbender Regional Trail, trying to get kind of these bigger long-term visions together. So if an opportunity comes up, we'll be able to strike as a region.
That's great. So I'm feeling torn between a question I have for you and what else I wanted to share. Well, first, let me hear from Emily and John about what you're excited about. Tristan just shared some kind of areas where he's interested and excited about potential change. What do you feel excited about and optimistic about at present? Yeah, Emily?
I think one of the things I'm really excited about, because it's kind of new to my role, is working more with public engagement. And that involves doing work with the Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as figuring out innovative ways to meet people where they're at. And I'm really hoping that can involve outreach to more underserved communities, as well as communities that are outside of the central regions that exist within the MPO boundaries. So that's what I'm most excited about over the next year.
Cool. So if those people are watching now or later, either live or after the fact, if people who are leaders in some of the communities that have conventionally not been served or had the same opportunities to provide input, we heard it here first, and Emily is a person of her word. And so she's a great contact, for that, because it requires those community connections. And I know AARP is excited to work with you on, that sort of outreach. And thank you. Cool. What about you, John?
Well, I mean, in some ways, the kind of the funding thing is still in kind of question of kind of long term, but as Tristan said, the short term's a little bit better. I'm still excited about a lot of projects that have been in the works for several years are now coming to fruition. So everything from the Rome Indictment Greenway to actually the one that's spooling up right now with a lot of steam behind it is the Acoustic Trail down in Henderson. So for me, that is like the one that I want to always sit in on some of those talks and discussions, because that is like a awesome project that looks like it's just moving downhill with a lot of enthusiasm.
Wow. So tell us more about the Acoustic Trail project. I'm feeling your enthusiasm.
So yes, the Acoustic Trail, and maybe even a few folks know a bit more of the backstory, but it's in Henderson County. It will be going along the Rails to Trails program out there. So they're working with, I believe, Conserving Carolina for the land and with the railroad out there. And I do think they're actually starting the process of removing some of the rails and rail ties. They're still kind of working on the funding to get into construction and whatnot there and the engineering behind it. But yeah, that was a project that the NPO is assisting with through the LAP program. So it's providing funding for the first 3 of 5 stages.
Wow.
And once this is complete, it'll be actually the longest continuous greenway within the region. So anytime that there's a new project that's kicking off that has a lot of kind of go behind it, it's always exciting. Those are the fun ones, especially when you start seeing even if it's just removing some of the rails back there, and that's actually the railroad doing it, not any entity yet. But that's where the fun things is, when you start seeing it even before the engineering is done.
Wow. So have you been out there watching them, or had the opportunity to check it out in real time?
I have not seen them pulling out the rails yet, but that is one of the things that, with Henderson County, is just the outreach is they're seeing, like, because it's so owned by the rail entity there, they're kind of removing some of their infrastructure that they're probably going to reuse or stockpile. But, folks see movement going on out there. They know that this project exists. So even though it's not the county or us doing any of the work, it's just that activity there. It's fun to see. So.
Totally. Oh, that's exciting. Wow, I wasn't really aware how on the ground that was moving forward, the Acoustic Trail, that it's really happening. Seems like it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of talk about that for a long time. Speaking of Henderson County, here's the announcement that I wanted to share, and I don't think I've mentioned it to any of you yet, is that every year AARP sponsors something called the Community Challenge Grant, and I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's an opportunity for some, high visibility, quick build sort of projects. And they usually fund about 4 throughout North Carolina. And this year, I'm glad to share that we have provided $10,000 to the Friends of Downtown Hendersonville. And that's going to be, I'm looking over here because I'm kind of reading a little bit more about the project, but the project will build a pedestrian connection between the two downtown commercial districts through creative, visible street and crosswalk murals that will be selected and created through a community engagement process. So specifically, it's going to draw attention to the pedestrian connections between 7th Avenue and the Main Street Municipal Service Districts in North Carolina. So certainly they've had, been working on this project for a long time and brought in resources from many places, but we're excited to see it's one of those examples of a small win, I think, that people can do in their community to kind of revitalize, especially after some of the social isolation that we've all been experiencing, for people to be able to get out and see some change in their community. It provides a sense of optimism. Um, so that's the good news. And I'll remind people that every year AARP does do this grant process, and that's part of our larger initiative around livable communities. And I'm just going to put up a little banner. AARP is the branch of the World Health Organization's Livable Communities Initiative, and that's oriented around making communities more livable for all ages. So there are 8 domains that we look at when we look at livability, and transportation is one of those 8 domains. So that's my little plug for the moment. So Tristan, here's a question about if people should be optimistic about. What do you think the temperature is on the I-26 interchange? Is that something, what's what are you hearing from the community, and where is that in the timeline? Tell us more about that project.
Sure. So just a little bit of an overview for those who don't know. There is a new interchange being proposed between the Brevard Road interchange and the Long Shoals Road interchange. It would be around mile marker 35.
Okay.
And so as of right now, the project is starting to be designed, and there's about $10 million that has been programmed towards the project from the state. But the project is likely to cost somewhere between 25, 35, even maybe up to $40 million.
Wow.
So there has been a lot of discussion about, how high of a priority is this project? The state is generally expecting to try to get this thing going and start construction next fall, which is a very, very quick timeline
Wow.
for a project like that. So all in all, I think there are transportation merits for the project. I think what we've started to see is that putting in the interchange, having a connector road that goes between 191 and I-26 in that area would remove somewhere in the area of 10 to 15,000 vehicles per day from NC 191. And vice versa. If you don't have that, then you're dumping a lot of new traffic from the projected development onto 191.
Okay.
So there are transportation merits, but I think the concern is that depending on where the funding comes from for the project, it may impact the schedule of other projects that have been on the kind of committed funded list for a long, long time. So I think as of right now, the general feeling is, some people think it's a great project, and some people are more worried about the process and how it impacts other projects. Mm-hmm. So I think with this one, the devil's going to be in the details. The state Senate has proposed putting $30 million into the state budget to put towards this project, and that would not impact other transportation projects. So that would be a big part of, I think, the discussions with this project and whether or not it ultimately gets approved.
So the project that you mentioned between, NC 191 and Long Shoals Road that would take some traffic, kind of take some traffic off of 191, how is that related to the I-26 interchange intersection there? Are they like one and the same, or interconnected?
Sure. So I guess let's take a step back. So I think late last year, early this year, Buncombe County announced that Pratt Whitney would be developing a manufacturing site in South Buncombe County. So they are planning on a very, very large facility, a very large investment, including investment in workforce training. And I think what we've been told is it's the fourth largest investment or economic investment in North America.
Wow.
And so it's a big deal. 800 new jobs are projected with anticipated wages well above the regional average. And so as part of that, there is a new bridge and access road being constructed. That's being funded through Golden Leaf and Biltmore Farms. And so you can already see that. If you go down to the Arboretum, you can see construction happening on that bridge. And so that's going to provide access from the Pratt & Whitney site over to 191.
Gotcha.
From the state side, what they said was, we can provide a new interchange off of I-26 that would connect over to that new access road. So it's a
Nice.
big change that's going on down there, and we don't anticipate it to be just Pratt & Whitney. It's a 400-acre site that could be developed, and Pratt & Whitney would be taking up roughly a quarter of it. So we do anticipate Pratt & Whitney is going to be there, but there's going to be a whole lot more too. And so getting access, providing connectivity, that's something our region needs more of, especially to be able to absorb new developments and not overstress our roadways. But at the same time, I think the general concern from a lot of folks is this project is potentially leapfrogging a number of other priorities.
Wow.
Sorry, that's a long spiel. That's
I needed it. I didn't understand all the pieces to this puzzle. So it really points to how when you change, one of those domains or one sector, it affects everything else. And, as we bring in new jobs and increase our workforce opportunities here, the way it affects transportation, is something that I don't think everybody always thinks through. And I remember one of our first coffee and conversations in Hendersonville, NC 191 was a big concern, back then, several years ago, and that's before a project like this was going to go in. So, wow. Okay. Anything that anybody wants to add to that? That was I think, good for people to understand. All right.
I think another point to add is that, that is kind of the stretch of I-26 that I think kind of is probably highest on people's misery index. And so having another interchange, having another kind of, we call it a relief valve for when things go wrong on I-26, that's something that would be generally beneficial to the traveling public. But I do think still the general question is, do the benefits of the project outweigh the concerns about leapfrogging other projects, potential delays to other projects. How does that balance out in our board members' minds?
Oh, so that's the role of the French Broad River Metropolitan Organization right now, is to listen to your member governments and the leaders of those member governments and understanding how they see this project. Ultimately, does the French Broad River Metropolitan Organization make a decision on that prioritization, or what is your role?
Right. So the MPO has been requested to add it to the region's 25-year plan, our MTP, or Metropolitan Transportation Plan. In terms of Federal Highways process, they will not permit a new interchange onto I-26 without the MPO adopting this project. So it
Wow.
is, it is kind of up to the MPO board at this point whether or not this project moves forward.
So if people watching have a strong opinion about it, they should speak with their elected officials. I guess, is that the right pathway?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to your elected officials. Send an email to mpo@landofsky.org. You can contact us, let us know, and we'll be passing on comments to our board members, or show up to a meeting, and we have public comment at the beginning and ending of every TCC and board meeting.
Great. Well, I know that our MPO is very receptive and eager to have public input. It's just a matter of letting people know what the pathway is. So if you're watching and you know other people who have questions or concerns, this is one of the pathways that you can take to express your needs or views. So I want to just remind that people watching today that if you have any additional questions for our transportation planners, this is your opportunity to get them in here. And we would love to see your comments. But if we don't have any other comments, I'll just ask each of you if there's anything else that you think people would want to know watching here today about transportation and making our communities more accessible.
I want to know what you're hearing and what you think is most important.
Yeah, well, I wasn't totally prepared for I know, it's good. It's good. So I'm thinking about, a lot of older adults or people 50 plus, which, is like all of us sooner or later, are not driving with as much frequency as they have in the past. So concerns about transportation congestion have been, reduced. And I would say prior to COVID, that was, always one of the biggest complaints and concerns was, people who driving single occupancy vehicles for the most part, and congestion on highways and roads. Secondary to that is probably transit, just the desire for people to have kind of greater ease and understanding about their transit options. So I know when we did strives a couple months ago, we really pointed to some of the changes that have happened with Asheville Regional Transit. But I think one of the bigger pulse issues is that interconnectivity between county and city transit options that people experience, and also inter-county options, especially with a lot of healthcare infrastructure being centralized in Buncombe County, although there's healthcare infrastructure in Madison, Haywood, Henderson counties as well, Transylvania County too. I think that that's kind of an ongoing area of concern and questions. So those are the hot topics. I mean, nothing that's really especially new. I will say that AARP is working with some partners to plan a Livable Appalachia Summit in the fall of 2021. So this year, October through December. And we're going to be working with our partners in Virginia and Tennessee, because we feel like they face some similar struggles and opportunities as we do in this area, to do a 4-part series. And the first part of it is going to be around asset-based growth, how communities can grow and build on their strengths and preserve outdoor spaces. The second one is going to be on broadband infrastructure specifically. I just saw an article this morning about how the mountain region really has, worse broadband connectivity than other rural parts of North Carolina. and what we can learn from others, our best practices. The third will be transportation, and how people have found creative ways to use transportation assets in their community, work with planners, so that older adults are, as we age, our communities remain as accessible and affordable as possible. And then the fourth being housing. And I would say that the intersection of transportation and housing is the linchpin. It's the hard stuff. How people can age in community and age in place, how they can get to their home and get back out into the community. And then, unfortunately, a lot of the challenges that I think we face today are a result of yesteryear's planning, and also consumer demand. People don't always want to live in areas of greater congestion, and so that creates the greatest access. Another issue there is that when people try to, purchase a home or rent a home or an apartment in the center of the city where you have the greatest kind of density, it's expensive. A lot of people can't afford that. So I think that that's kind of like the leading edge, the painful edge that we're all facing, and like what we can creative solutions to those scenarios are what we're looking to get out of the summit this fall.
And forgive me if I'm spoiling things, but I believe you have a pretty big name associated with that event.
Yeah, for those of you who may or may not know the Livable community celebrity list, Gil Penalosa is one of the celebrities of Livable communities. He has a nonprofit organization, is the director of a nonprofit called 880 Cities, and the idea being it's kind of become a catchphrase like Band-Aid has. It's the idea being if a city's good for, or a community's good for somebody who's 8, it's good for somebody who's 80. And Gil Penalosa is going to be our keynote speaker for this event. And the first part of the event will be likely in person with a virtual component in the Asheville area. And so other details have not yet been kind of grounded, but we are expecting to have that exciting speaker join us. Yeah. Well, people who tuned in today got to hear it first because a lot of this news that we've shared hasn't even gone public yet. So that's cool. So people interested in these topics, the audience is going to have to be people like us, planners, but also community members, elected officials, and the business community, chambers of commerce and the business community. So that's our exciting news. Anybody else have any exciting news before we call it a day? Well, I want to remind people that, you can find our great friends at the French Broad MPO right there at their website. And if you want more information about upcoming events with AARP, events like this one and, so many others, you can always go to our regional website where we also highlight regional stories. Thank you all. It's always fun to stay up to date on what's happening in our region in transportation and transportation planning. And thanks for turning the tables on me, Tristan. That's fun. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to.
Talk about a pressure valve. We'll just move the pressure over. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll say bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca.
Take care, all.